The sweltering tropical heat hung heavy over a Slido airfield on Saipan in June 1944, as American forces relentlessly pushed their way inland. Amidst the chaos of shattered hangars and pockmarked runways, a group of Japanese ground crew members momentarily forgot the incessant artillery barrage. Their attention was riveted by a sight of extraordinary significance: a downed F6F Hellcat, remarkably intact, resting in the tall grasses near the perimeter of the airfield. This was no mere debris. It represented an invaluable opportunity. For close to 2 years, Japanese aviators had been transmitting increasingly desperate dispatches, detailing encounters with a formidable new American fighter that sliced through their aerial formations with an unprecedented lethality. The Hellcat had made its combat debut in August 1943, and within a mere few months, it had irrevocably shifted the balance of air superiority in the vast expanse of the Pacific theater. While intelligence reports and pilot testimonies offered some insights, they were inherently limited. Now, finally, the tangible article lay before them: the very aircraft systematically dismantling Japanese naval aviation, awaiting meticulous scrutiny. The recovery operation commenced without delay, even as the ferocious battle for Saipan raged around them. Ground crews toiled under intermittent enemy fire, their immediate objective being to relocate the fighter to a more secure position. Subsequently, they prepared it for its eventual transportation back to the Japanese homeland. Every passing hour was critical. American troops were advancing at an alarming pace, and this invaluable prize absolutely could not be permitted to fall back into enemy hands. The Hellcat transcended its identity as a single airplane. It served as a veritable window into the core of American industrial and engineering philosophy, offering a crucial chance to comprehend the formidable adversary Japan now confronted. By the latter part of June, as Saipan fully succumbed to American control, the captured Hellcat was already well on its journey to the Japanese mainland. It ultimately arrived at the Yokosuka Naval Air Technical Arsenal, where an assembly of Japan's most brilliant aeronautical engineers eagerly awaited the opportunity to dissect it, both conceptually and physically. The initial external appraisal revealed an aircraft that presented a starkly brutish appearance when contrasted with the sleek, elegant contours characteristic of Japanese fighters. It was undeniably heavier, noticeably thicker, and more substantial in every conceivable dimension. Where Japanese fighter designs pursued an aesthetic of grace and agility primarily through rigorous weight reduction, this American machine appeared to embrace sheer mass as a fundamental principle. The engineers circumambulated it slowly on that first day, meticulously taking measurements, their hands gliding over the precisely riveted panels, thoroughly examining the expansive wings and the formidable cowling that enveloped its powerful engine. They promptly took note of the significant armor plating position behind the pilot's seat, a protective layer robust enough to thwart rifle-caliber projectiles. They also observed the exceptionally sturdy landing gear, clearly engineered to endure the punishing stresses inherent in continuous carrier operations. Furthermore, they scrutinized the formidable armament of 6.50 caliber machine guns, 3 integrated into each wing, with ammunition boxes designed to hold hundreds of rounds, ensuring sustained firepower. Every facet of the Hellcat's design emphatically communicated a distinct philosophy that accorded paramount importance to pilot survivability, sustained offensive capability, and unwavering reliability, rather than the singular pursuit of pure performance metrics that had guided Japanese fighter development for a full decade. What they were meticulously examining was not merely a combat aircraft. It was a profound physical embodiment of America's colossal industrial might and a fundamentally divergent answer to the critical question of what truly constituted an effective combat aircraft. the engineers harbored the profound realization that comprehending this intricate machine might represent Japan's final, desperate opportunity to formulate an effective countermeasure to the burgeoning American air superiority. As they braced themselves to embark upon the detailed examination, they remained wholly unaware of the extent to which this captured fighter would unveil its secrets, or indeed, how profoundly discouraging those impending revelations would ultimately prove to be. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please feel free to share a comment about where you are from and what you think about this compelling topic. By the middle of 1944, Japanese naval aviation was experiencing a catastrophic decline in the skies above the Pacific, a dire reality that was known to many, yet few were willing to fully acknowledge the immense scale of the problem. The Mitsubishi A6M0, an aircraft that had instilled terror in Allied pilots during 1941 and 1942, had by this point become an undeniable death trap. American pilots, through relentless combat experience, had thoroughly identified its critical weaknesses, its notoriously poor handling characteristics at high speeds, an almost complete absence of armor protection for the pilot and vital systems, and wing structures that were prone to catastrophic failure under the intense G-forces encountered during high-speed dives. More significantly, the Americans had ingeniously developed and deployed fighter aircraft specifically engineered to exploit these very vulnerabilities, and the Hellcat stood prominently at the forefront of this formidable list. The intelligence chasm confronting Japanese aviation was truly crushing. Pilots would return from the harrowing crucible of combat, those fortunate enough to return at all, bearing reports of American fighters that possessed an astonishing capacity to absorb extraordinary amounts of damage and yet continue to fly and fight. They vividly described aircraft capable of diving away from a pursuing Zero at speeds that would render any attempt to follow them utterly suicidal. They reported an overwhelming firepower that could unequivocally shred a Japanese fighter with a single, devastating burst. However, these reports, emanating from traumatized pilots amidst the chaotic maelstrom of combat, were not equivalent to precise engineering data. They could not provide crucial details such as bore and stroke measurements of engines, compression ratios, precise wing loading figures, or intricate fuel system specifications. They were utterly incapable of explaining the sophisticated technical solutions that Americans had successfully implemented, solutions that Japanese engineers continued to grapple with fruitlessly. The gravity of the situation had escalated to such a desperate degree that by early 1944, Japanese naval air groups operating across the Pacific were suffering pilot losses at a rate far exceeding their capacity to train and deploy replacements. The once mighty First Air Fleet had been utterly decimated at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, an engagement that American pilots would later famously christen the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. In a single, brutal day of combat on June 19, Japan incurred the catastrophic loss of approximately 300 aircraft, along with their irreplaceable cadre of highly trained pilots. The Hellcat had served as the primary instrument in this devastating slaughter, being directly responsible for the overwhelming majority of the aerial victories achieved. What made this burgeoning crisis particularly acute and profoundly challenging was the increasingly isolated environment in which Japan's aeronautical engineering establishment was forced to operate. American aircraft designs were evolving at an astonishing pace, with new models and numerous variants appearing with relentless regularity. Each successive iteration meticulously incorporated invaluable lessons gleaned from intense combat experiences and significant advancements in technological innovation. While Japanese intelligence occasionally managed to procure general specifications through various clandestine channels, they remained fundamentally incapable of deciphering the practical engineering solutions that actually made those impressive specifications attainable. How exactly did American engines manage to produce such prodigious power output while simultaneously maintaining exceptional levels of reliability? How did their aircraft manage to endure battle damage that would unequivocally obliterate any Japanese fighter? What specific materials and advanced manufacturing techniques enabled them to construct such remarkably robust structures without incurring unacceptable weight penalties? The captured Hellcat represented precisely what Japanese engineers so desperately craved: unadulterated, hard data. Not mere estimates, not fragmented combat reports filtered through the impenetrable fog of war, and certainly not speculative assumptions based on distant or incomplete observations. Here was an actual, tangible American fighter aircraft that they could meticulously measure, precisely weigh, systematically disassemble, and rigorously test. They possessed the unprecedented opportunity to meticulously examine every single component, to thoroughly analyze every critical engineering decision, and to fully comprehend every intricate design compromise. They could, at long last, directly answer the vexing questions that had relentlessly haunted them since late 1943, when the formidable Hellcat first began to appear in significant and increasingly devastating numbers. Beyond the realm of pure technical intelligence, there was also a profound psychological dimension to this capture. Japanese aviation had been meticulously constructed upon an unwavering belief in the inherent superiority of their distinctive design philosophy, that a fighter aircraft should, above all else, prioritize exceptional maneuverability and extended range, that highly skilled pilots inherently did not require the encumbrance of heavy armor or substantial armament, and that a fundamental elegance in design intrinsically reflected a superior capability in combat. The iconic Zero had perfectly embodied this philosophy, and for a fleeting, glorious period, it had utterly dominated the vast Pacific skies. However, Japanese pilots were now perishing in alarming droves, and the very aircraft responsible for their demise represented a completely antithetical set of design priorities. The meticulous examination of the Hellcat thus compelled a confrontational reckoning with the unsettling possibility that Japan's most fundamental assumptions regarding fighter design had been profoundly erroneous all along. The Hellcat arrived at Yokosuka in numerous pieces, having been partially disassembled for the logistical necessities of transport, yet with the vast majority of its major components sufficiently intact for a thorough and comprehensive examination. The recovery team had executed a truly remarkable feat under extremely perilous combat conditions, successfully managing to preserve the aircraft's essential systems despite the immensely challenging circumstances surrounding its capture. Engineers immediately instituted a rigorous and systematic documentation process, meticulously photographing every single component before embarking on any detailed examination. They were acutely aware that this might represent their sole opportunity to study an intact example of America's most successful carrier-borne fighter. The initial, comprehensive walk-around inspection alone consumed several days. Dedicated teams of specialists simultaneously examined different, distinct aspects of the aircraft. Structures engineers meticulously focused their expertise on the airframe. Power plant experts concentrated their efforts on the complex engine. Systems specialists diligently studied the intricate hydraulics and control mechanisms, and armament technicians precisely cataloged the weapons installation. What immediately struck every observer was the sheer, undeniable robustness of the aircraft's construction. Where Japanese fighters typically utilized delicate assemblies and minimalist structures in their relentless pursuit of weight savings, the Hellcat employed heavy forgings, substantial extrusions, and conspicuously thick skin panels. The aircraft's empty weight was approximately 9,200 pounds, a figure nearly double that of a Zero, underscoring this fundamental design divergence. The meticulous examination of the fuselage construction unveiled a fundamentally different and innovative approach to stress skin design. Japanese engineers had honed their skills to become absolute masters at creating exceptionally lightweight structures using remarkably thin aluminum, which was then painstakingly formed and assembled. In stark contrast, the Hellcat's fuselage utilized a heavier gauge of aluminum, bolstered by a far more substantial internal framing system. The engineers calculated that the fuselage alone possessed the inherent structural integrity to likely withstand loads that would, without question, tear a Zero completely apart. They discovered extensive reinforcement in numerous locations that Japanese designers would never have even deemed necessary. Additional framing meticulously integrated around hatches, strategically placed doubler plates at critical high-stress attachment points, and massive, robust bulkheads meticulously separating major fuselage sections, all contributing to an unprecedented level of structural resilience. The examination of the Hellcat's major fuselage sections provided profound insights, particularly when attention turned to the aircraft's robust wing structure. Engineers observed that the Hellcat's wings were ingeniously constructed around a colossal central component, forming an uninterrupted framework that passed directly through the fuselage. This specific design conferred exceptional rigidity, establishing an exceptionally stable platform for the landing gear and affording substantial safeguarding for both the pilot and the crucial fuel tanks. In stark contrast, conventional Japanese interceptors typically employed attenuated wing structures that attached to the fuselage at multiple discrete points. While this divergent methodology undoubtedly saved weight, it unfortunately concentrated stress at these attachment points and offered considerably less inherent protection in the event of a crash. Furthermore, the Hellcat's wings integrated a significant leading-edge structure specifically engineered to absorb combat damage without succumbing to catastrophic failure. The engineering experts were notably impressed, speculating that one could conceivably shoot away portions of the wing's outer panels, and yet the aircraft would still retain its flight capabilities. During those initial days of meticulous scrutiny, the engineering team uncovered another equally compelling aspect: undeniable evidence of mass production techniques on an unprecedented magnitude, a scale that Japanese industry simply could not emulate. Panel edges bore the distinct hallmarks of mechanical shaping rather than painstaking handwork, while rivet patterns displayed a meticulous uniformity, strongly suggestive of automated or at least semi-automated assembly processes. Crucially, components exhibited a degree of interchangeability rarely observed in Japanese aircraft, where proficient artisans often hand-fitted individual parts during the assembly phase. It became clear that the Hellcat had been conceived from its very inception for expedited, large-scale manufacturing by a workforce that did not necessitate years of specialized training. As every detail was painstakingly documented, a disquieting panorama began to emerge. This was not merely a different fighter aircraft. It represented a fundamental shift in industrial and engineering paradigms. The Hellcat embodied an American philosophy that unequivocally prioritized pilot lives over marginal weight savings, that valued unwavering reliability above squeezing out a few extra knots of speed, and that mandated an aircraft's ability to survive not only enemy fire, but also the arduous operational conditions of carrier deployments and the unavoidable mishaps inherent in high-tempo combat operations. Every single design decision within the Hellcat underscored priorities that Japanese aviation had systematically undervalued for years. Yet, the engineers possessed the professional acumen to recognize superior solutions when they encountered them, even when these solutions directly contradicted established doctrines and everything their rigorous training had taught them about aircraft design. When the engine removal team finally extricated the formidable Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp from the Hellcat's cowling, several engineers were simply awestruck, standing motionless and staring at the sheer scale of the power plant. They were certainly aware of the specifications from intelligence reports. 2,000 horsepower generated by an 18-cylinder, two-row radial engine. However, mere data on paper could not convey the tangible presence and immense power of this mechanical behemoth. The engine alone weighed approximately 2,360 pounds, a figure that considerably surpassed the total weight of entire Japanese fighters from just a few years prior. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The systematic dismantling process commenced with meticulous precision. Engineers diligently photographed each stage, precisely measured every individual component, and recorded detailed notes concerning the assembly techniques employed. The R2800 cylinder heads were the first elements to be removed, immediately revealing combustion chambers and valve arrangements that elicited fervent debate among the specialists. The bore measured a precise 5.75 inches, while the stroke was 6 inches, culminating in a total swept volume of 2,800 cubic inches, equating to almost 46 liters. In stark contrast, the Nakajima Sakai engine, which powered the iconic Zero, displaced only 27.9 liters and yielded roughly 1,130 horsepower. The profound realization was that the Americans were extracting almost twice the power from an engine that wasn't even proportionally twice the displacement. Nevertheless, displacement alone did not fully account for the observed performance disparity. As the engineers delved deeper into the R2800's internals, they uncovered layer after layer of intricate and sophisticated engineering solutions. The crankshaft, for instance, was a colossal forged component, meticulously machined to exacting specifications and tolerances that Japanese manufacturing facilities consistently struggled to attain. The connecting rods utilized cutting-edge alloys and integrated design features specifically intended to mitigate stress concentrations. The pistons, too, showed clear evidence of intricate casting methodologies and incorporated integrated cooling channels, which were crucial in managing the immense thermal loads generated by high compression ratios and aggressive ignition timing. The supercharger system particularly captivated the propulsion experts. The R2800 skillfully utilized a two-speed, two-stage supercharger, a design capable of sustaining elevated manifold pressure across a diverse range of elevations. Japanese engines, conversely, typically employed comparatively rudimentary and suboptimal supercharger designs, a concession driven partly by inherent manufacturing constraints and partly by a predominant focus on low-altitude performance, where the majority of Pacific combat engagements occurred. The American supercharger, therefore, exemplified a level of exacting fabrication that necessitated specialized machinery and rigorous quality control processes, which Japanese industry simply did not possess in adequate supply. The fuel injection system unveiled yet another significant advantage. While numerous Japanese power plants still relied on carburetors, which could induce fuel deprivation during negative G or inverted maneuvers, the R2800 employed a cutting-edge injection apparatus that ensured uninterrupted fuel delivery regardless of the aircraft's orientation. This ostensibly insignificant detail had momentous ramifications in combat. American pilots could execute negative G descents without experiencing abrupt engine cessation, whereas Zero pilots were compelled to execute an inverted roll before diving to maintain positive G and keep their engines running. That critical half-second of additional maneuvering time could prove to be the decisive factor between life and death in a frenetic dogfight. Perhaps the undoubtedly most striking revelation was the engine's inherent margin for dependability. Every facet of the R-2800's construction indicated that it was designed to consistently produce 2,000 horsepower, not as a fleeting maximum emergency setting, but as a protracted combat performance output. By Japanese standards, the components were decidedly overbuilt. Bearing surfaces were notably larger than seemed strictly necessary for their function. Cooling conduits were ample, and oil circulation was remarkably vigorous. The Americans had evidently prioritized engine reliability, deeming it worth the weight penalty of heavier construction. Japanese engines, by contrast, were often pushed to their operational zenith, with components sized to exacting minimum permissible specifications in a relentless effort to save every possible gram of mass. Consequently, this approach resulted in engines that produced impressive power-to-weight ratios on paper, but suffered frequent malfunctions in the unforgiving environment of combat operations. As the engineering team systematically documented their observations, they confronted a disquieting reality. Replicating the R-2800's performance would necessitate not merely superior blueprints, but a comprehensive industrial framework that Japan simply did not possess. The particularized alloys, the meticulous apparatus, the rigorous oversight mechanisms, the production acumen, all of it would demand a protracted period to develop, and Japan, critically, faced a severe deficit of time. The fuel system examination commenced with a simple percussion on the Hellcat's wing tanks. Instead of the conventional expectation of a hollow metallic ring from an aluminum fuel cell, the engineers registered a muffled impact. They meticulously incised into the tank and immediately discovered layers of a resilient, rubbery composite interspersed within the aluminum structure. These were integral, self-sealing fuel tanks, designed to effectively close around bullet holes and avert disastrous fuel depletion. This was not merely conceptual technology. Japanese engineers were aware of the existence of self-sealing tanks, but witnessing one disassembled unequivocally revealed the sophisticated practical execution of the American implementation. The self-sealing mechanism itself comprised multiple layers of diverse constituents. The innermost stratum was a polymeric synthetic rubber compound specifically formulated to expand when exposed to aviation fuel, thereby automatically occluding small breaches. Outside this layer sat a section of unprocessed textile, followed by a layer of hardened rubber, and finally the external aluminum casing. When a bullet perforated the tank, the gasoline would instantly cause the inner rubber to expand into the hole within seconds, arresting the seepage before any significant volume of fuel could be lost. Japanese engineers rigorously evaluated the system by intentionally perforating an exemplar segment and pouring gasoline through it. They observed the aperture occlude itself in approximately 15 seconds. The implications were profound. American pilots could endure numerous impacts to their fuel tanks and still achieve an unscathed return to base, whereas a single incendiary projectile through a Zero's unshielded fuel reservoir would invariably incinerate the aircraft. The considerable mass increment imposed by this protective feature was substantial, approximately 200 pounds per aircraft for the fuel tank protection alone. Japanese designers had consistently spurned self-sealing tanks throughout the war, contending that the added weight would unacceptably compromise operational capabilities, and that proficiently skilled airmen should simply avoid getting hit. However, the harsh realities of aerial combat had mercilessly revealed the fallacy in that reasoning. Zeros were incinerated in the sky by the hundreds, and their pilots, the meticulously seasoned veterans, who were ostensibly skilled enough not to need such protection, were perishing alongside them. Shifting their focus to the cockpit area, engineers noted the pervasive presence of protective plating. Behind the pilot's seat sat a robust steel barrier, approximately 3 to 8 inches thick, meticulously inclined to deflect incoming projectiles from behind and below. The headrest, too, integrated supplementary shielding. Even the windscreen's reinforced glass was of sufficient thickness to halt rifle-bore projectiles from the front. The cumulative mass of this armor approached 240 pounds. The total mass of the Hellcat's protective plating approached an astounding 240 pounds, a burden that Japanese aircraft designers would have unequivocally deemed unacceptable for their own fighter aircraft. In stark contrast, the iconic Zero fighter, a cornerstone of the Imperial Japanese Navy's aerial might, incorporated no armor whatsoever, leaving its pilots entirely exposed to hostile fire. This profound disparity in design philosophy was starkly illuminated when Allied engineers conducted rigorous ballistic evaluations using captured Japanese ammunition. During these tests, armor samples were strategically positioned at varying distances and subjected to volleys of 7.7 mm rounds from a Type 89 machine gun. The armor proved remarkably resilient, intercepting every incoming projectile. Even the more potent 20 mm rounds discharged from a Type 99 cannon, while capable of inflicting damage to the plate, failed to achieve complete penetration at typical engagement distances, underscoring the Hellcat's formidable defensive capabilities. In their subsequent technical assessments, the engineers emphatically stated that American aviators were ensconced within a protective shell that rendered them virtually impervious to the primary armaments deployed by Japanese fighter planes. Conversely, their Japanese counterparts occupied cockpits where even a mere pistol shot could prove fatal, highlighting a critical vulnerability. This narrative of robust protection extended beyond mere armor plating to encompass the entire suite of survival equipment. The Hellcat's pilot seat, for instance, was engineered with exceptional strength, specifically designed to safeguard the pilot during the often violent exigencies of carrier landings, impacts that would assuredly shatter more fragile, furniture-grade seating. The cockpit environment was further enhanced by an integrated CO2 fire suppression system, capable of inundating the engine bay with inert gas to swiftly quell any incipient fires. Moreover, the pilot's harness was a sophisticated 5-point restraint mechanism, meticulously crafted to secure him firmly during aggressive aerial maneuvers or the brutal forces of a crash landing. The overarching design ethos of the Hellcat proclaimed a singular, resounding message. The pilot's life was of paramount value, far outweighing any marginal weight savings that might be gleaned by stripping away essential protective measures. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. This fundamental divergence in design philosophy suddenly lent a chilling clarity to previously perplexing Japanese combat reports. Pilots had frequently recounted encounters with Hellcats that appeared to absorb dozens of hits, and yet continued to engage fiercely. They had described American aviators who seemed to exhibit an almost reckless bravery, pressing their attacks even while under intense enemy fire. Now, the engineers grasped the underlying truth. These American pilots were not necessarily endowed with greater courage. They were simply afforded superior protection. This robust defense empowered them to sustain an assault, knowing that their aircraft was meticulously engineered to bring them home, even when significantly damaged. Japanese pilots, operating unarmored aircraft equipped with unprotected fuel tanks, were compelled to exercise an infinitely greater degree of caution, as a single well-placed shot could prove instantly lethal. Recognizing the profound implications of this disparity, the task of making the captured Hellcat airworthy became an absolute, urgent priority by August 1944. Japanese test pilots desperately needed to experience firsthand the formidable adversary their combat aviators had been confronting in the vast expanse of the Pacific theater. The dedicated restoration team toiled relentlessly, working around the clock, meticulously cannibalizing parts from other captured equipment and fabricating bespoke components that could not be readily sourced. The powerful R-2800 engine, a marvel of American engineering, received meticulous attention, with engineers aiming to restore it to its full operational specifications to acquire precise performance data. By September 1944, the Hellcat was finally prepared for its inaugural flight under Japanese control. Commander Takahide Aoi, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most seasoned and respected test pilots, settled into the Hellcat's cockpit at Yokosuka. His immediate impression was one of unexpected confinement. Everything felt remarkably cramped. The Hellcat had been designed to accommodate the larger stature of American pilots, and even average-sized Japanese aviators found the cockpit interior uncomfortably tight. However, this minor discomfort dissipated the moment he advanced the throttle for takeoff. The R-2800 engine erupted with a thunderous roar, a sound utterly distinct from any Japanese engine, a deep, resonant growl that spoke volumes of immense power reserves. The acceleration down the runway was, by Japanese standards, brutally forceful. The Hellcat weighed in excess of 12,000 pounds at takeoff, a mass significantly greater than any fighter aircraft Aoi had ever piloted. Yet, the colossal engine simply overwhelmed this substantial weight with sheer, raw horsepower. The aircraft rotated and ascended from the runway at an angle that would have been utterly unattainable for a Zero. Aoi meticulously documented in his post-flight report that the initial climb rate surpassed 3,500 feet per minute at sea level, a performance metric substantially superior to anything then existing in the Japanese inventory. Once airborne, Aoi meticulously commenced a systematic series of tests. He subjected the Hellcat to a rigorous sequence of climbs, dives, and turns, assiduously recording its performance across various altitudes and power settings. The aircraft's handling characteristics were markedly different from those of Japanese fighters: heavier control forces, a less immediate response in pitch, demanding greater physical exertion to maneuver aggressively. Yet, these more substantial controls conferred a significant advantage rarely experienced by Japanese pilots: an unwavering, rock-solid stability at high speeds. Aoi deliberately pushed the Hellcat into a steep dive, accelerating past 400 knots indicated airspeed. A Zero, when subjected to such speeds, would typically buffet violently, its controls becoming mushy and unresponsive. The Hellcat, however, plunged straight and true, its controls remaining remarkably effective, its massive airframe effortlessly absorbing stresses that would have torn lighter aircraft asunder. The test report highlighted that the Hellcat possessed the inherent capability to disengage from virtually any combat scenario by simply diving away. If an American pilot found himself in peril, he could merely depress the nose and accelerate to speeds where Japanese fighters could not possibly follow without risking catastrophic structural failure. This straightforward tactical option, the liberty to disengage at will, fundamentally altered the dynamics of aerial combat. Japanese pilots were effectively compelled to commit to every engagement, as their aircraft lacked a reliable means of escape once a skirmish commenced. American pilots in Hellcats, however, enjoyed the strategic flexibility to choose their battles, initiating attacks when advantageous and diving away when outmatched. Aoi further conducted simulated dogfights against various Japanese fighter aircraft, including both the nimble Zeros and the newer, more potent Kawanishi N-1K Shirden. The outcomes unequivocally corroborated the reports from combat pilots. In a slow-speed, turning engagement, Japanese fighters could indeed outmaneuver the Hellcat, but the Hellcat pilots, or in this particular instance, the single pilot, simply refused to engage on those terms. By judiciously employing superior speed and vertical maneuvers, Aoi could dictate the conditions of engagement entirely. He could execute a swift zoom climb above Japanese fighters, leveraging the Hellcat's superior power-to-weight ratio at higher speeds, then plummet downwards with a decisive energy advantage. The Japanese fighters, attempting to emulate these vertical maneuvers, would rapidly shed speed, thereby transforming into vulnerable, easily targeted adversaries. The most sobering aspect of the testing involved evaluating endurance and simulating combat damage. While engineers had repaired the Hellcat's existing battle damage sufficiently to render it airworthy, they had intentionally left some non-critical damage in place to observe its impact on performance. The aircraft flew with several patched bullet holes and minor structural damage that would have unequivocally grounded any Japanese fighter. The degradation in performance was remarkably minimal. The Hellcat continued to fly, continued to fight, and, crucially, continued to bring the pilot safely back to base. Aoi's comprehensive final report culminated in a stark declaration that reverberated throughout Japanese naval aviation circles. American pilots were not merely operating a different class of aircraft. They were engaging in combat with an entirely distinct understanding of what an aircraft should be capable of enduring. The captured Hellcat compelled Japanese engineers to confront a fundamental question they had, for too long, sidestepped: what truly constituted an effective fighter aircraft? For over a decade, Japanese naval aviation had steadfastly pursued a singular vision, perfectly embodied by the Zero. This philosophy dictated that a fighter should be exceptionally light, highly maneuverable, and possess an extensive operational range to support offensive operations across the vast expanse of the Pacific. Every other attribute was deemed secondary. Armor was considered superfluous dead weight. Heavy armament was deemed unnecessary if one could simply outturn an opponent and deliver precise, surgical shots. Robust construction was viewed as wasteful when skilled craftsmen could meticulously construct elegant, lightweight structures. This deeply ingrained philosophy had its origins in Japan's inherent industrial limitations and resource scarcity, but it had gradually been elevated to the status of doctrine, almost approaching a religious dogma. The Zero's early, resounding successes had seemingly validated every single assumption. In 1941 and early 1942, Zeros had effortlessly decimated Allied opposition. The fighter's astonishing 1,900-mile range enabled it to escort bombers on missions that Allied strategists had considered utterly impossible. Its unparalleled maneuverability rendered it virtually untouchable in slow-speed dogfights. Pilots, rigorously trained in the demanding art of slow-speed combat, evolved into elite warriors, their exceptional skills honed through years of intensive practice. The Zero was not merely an aircraft, it was the tangible manifestation of the Japanese martial spirit, striving for victory through superior skill and unwavering fighting spirit rather than brute industrial might. The Hellcat, in stark contrast, represented the complete antithesis of this philosophy. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation had meticulously designed it with one overarching primary objective: to destroy enemy aircraft and, crucially, to bring American pilots home alive. This meant prioritizing speed over pure maneuverability, overwhelming firepower over delicate finesse, and robust protection over absolute performance. The Hellcat's design specifications placed such a heavy emphasis on pilot survival that some early Navy reviewers expressed concerns, worrying that it might be too heavy, too sluggish, too much of a truck to effectively compete with the notoriously nimble Japanese fighters. However, those initial concerns swiftly evaporated in the crucible of combat. The Hellcat achieved an astonishing kill ratio of approximately 19-1 against Japanese aircraft, meaning 19 enemy fighters were destroyed for every Hellcat lost in aerial combat. The raw numbers painted a brutal, unambiguous picture. The Zero's empty weight was approximately 3,700 pounds. The Hellcat's empty weight was a formidable 9,200 pounds, nearly 2.5 times heavier. But that substantial extra weight was the price of survival. The Hellcat possessed the incredible ability to absorb damage that would utterly obliterate a Zero and still manage to make its way back to the carrier. American pilots, recognizing and leveraging their aircraft's inherent strengths, developed tactics specifically designed to exploit these advantages. Diving attacks capitalized on superior speed and overwhelming firepower to annihilate enemies before slower, turning engagements could even develop. The innovative Thatch weave, conceived by Commander John Thatch, allowed Hellcat pilots to provide mutual support, covering each other in defensive patterns that effectively negated the Zero's turning advantage. The advent of the Hellcat fundamentally nullified the Zero's once vaunted turning superiority. Japanese military doctrine had long posited that exceptional individual pilot prowess would invariably surmount any inherent material deficiencies. The prevailing wisdom held that the most adept aviator in the most agile aircraft would inevitably triumph. However, the American Hellcat dramatically diminished the impact of individual skill. An average American pilot, operating a Hellcat and meticulously trained in the potent boom and zoom aerial combat strategy, possessed the capability to vanquish a highly skilled Japanese Zero pilot without ever engaging in a close-quarters turning dogfight. This tactical approach involved the American pilot executing a steep dive from a superior altitude, unleashing a torrent of fire from 6.50 caliber machine guns, collectively discharging an astonishing 4,800 rounds per minute. Following this devastating burst, the Hellcat would exploit its commanding speed advantage to rapidly ascend and disengage before the Zero could even register an effective counter-response. Should the initial assault fail to incapacitate the Zero, the Hellcat pilot would simply regain altitude and reinitiate the attack. The Zero pilot, critically deficient in the necessary speed for pursuit and the climb rate to vertically follow, was largely relegated to a desperate game of evasion, hoping for an error from the relentless Hellcat. A comparative analysis of operational ranges further underscored a profound philosophical divergence between the two nations' approaches to aircraft design. The Zero boasted an impressive combat radius of 1,800 miles, a feat achieved through stringent weight reduction and remarkable fuel efficiency measures. In stark contrast, the Hellcat's range extended to approximately 1,040 miles, a distance perfectly adequate for standard carrier-borne operations, but significantly less than its Japanese counterpart. Nevertheless, by 1944, the Zero's extraordinary range had become largely strategically irrelevant. Japan found itself increasingly engaged in a defensive struggle, and American carrier groups had advanced sufficiently close to the battlefront, rendering the Hellcat's more modest range entirely sufficient for all requisite combat sorties. Crucially, those additional miles the Zero could traverse came at a grievous expense. The complete absence of vital protective features that, had they been incorporated, would undoubtedly have preserved the lives of countless Japanese aviators. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Also, we encourage you to share in the comments where you are from and what your thoughts are on the topic discussed in this video. Examining both fighter aircraft side by side at the Yokosuka Naval Base, the engineering team gained a profound insight into the competing visions of aerial warfare held by the two nations. Japan, in essence, had forged a sword, an instrument of exquisite design, lethally effective in the hands of a master, yet inherently fragile. America, conversely, had constructed a hammer, heavy, perhaps lacking the nuanced elegance of its adversary, but overwhelmingly destructive and remarkably resilient. The sword paradigm had proven effective during the initial phases of the war, when Japan held the strategic initiative, and its seasoned pilots could selectively choose their engagements. However, as the conflict inexorably devolved into a brutal campaign of attrition, the inherent robustness and brute force of the hammer ultimately proved superior, inevitably shattering the more delicate sword. The comprehensive technical reports emanating from Yokosuka began their circulation throughout the Japanese naval aviation establishment in late 1944. These detailed analyses, however, merely served to confirm the desperate pleas that frontline pilots had been articulating with increasing urgency for many months prior. Combat veterans, returning from the relentless fighting in the Marianas, the Philippines, and numerous other contested islands across the vast Pacific theater, had been submitting after-action reports that read less like dispassionate tactical assessments and more like harrowing accounts of sheer terror. Now, these visceral personal narratives could be directly correlated with rigorous engineering data, providing an unequivocal explanation for the appalling and unsustainable casualty rates among Japanese pilots. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most distinguished flying aces, who had remarkably endured combat since the war's very inception, contributed invaluable testimony that was meticulously appended to the Hellcat analysis by the engineering team. Sakai himself had been tragically shot down and severely wounded in 1942, resulting in the permanent loss of sight in his right eye, yet he had courageously returned to active combat duty. His detailed August 1944 report vividly recounted a particular engagement over Iwo Jima, where his formation of Zero fighters had intercepted a group of Hellcats. "We achieved good position above them," Sakai's report stated, "and dove to attack. I fired at one from behind and saw strikes on his fuselage and wing. He did not catch fire. He did not fall. He simply rolled away and dove, accelerating to speeds we could not match. I had hit him perhaps 20 times, and he flew away as if nothing had happened." This disheartening scenario, depicting the Hellcat's uncanny resilience, reappeared with alarming frequency in subsequent combat reports. Pilots repeatedly recounted expending their entire ammunition loads into Hellcats, only to witness the American fighters stubbornly continuing their fight. The 7.7mm machine guns, which had proven adequately effective against early war Allied aircraft, were now rendered completely impotent against the Hellcat's substantial armor plating and robust structural integrity. Even the more powerful 20mm cannon rounds, unless they achieved direct hits on critical components, often failed to inflict decisive damage. Indeed, even when bullets managed to strike critical, unarmored sections of the Hellcat, the aircraft frequently refused to succumb. Conversely, a mere single, concentrated burst from a Hellcat's 6.50 caliber machine guns would utterly devastate a Zero, frequently leading to immediate, catastrophic structural failure, as its unprotected fuel tanks ignited explosively, or its delicate control surfaces were instantly shredded. The psychological ramifications of this profound mismatch in aircraft capabilities were utterly devastating. Japanese pilots were acutely aware that they were flying what amounted to death traps. They understood that a single, well-placed hit could instantly end their lives, while their adversaries appeared to be virtually invulnerable. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who had led fighter units throughout 1943 and into 1944, poignantly recorded his private thoughts in his journal, later recovered and excerpted in official reports detailing the precipitous collapse of pilot morale. "The men know they will not return. They know our aircraft cannot protect them. They fly anyway because duty demands it, but you can see the death in their eyes before they take off. We are not fighting a war. We are flying to our executions." The tactical reports that accompanied these deeply personal testimonies painted an equally grim and unvarnified picture. Japanese formations had painstakingly devised elaborate and intricate tactics specifically designed to counter the Hellcat's overwhelming advantages, yet none of these strategies proved consistently effective. They attempted, for instance, to entice American pilots into low-altitude turning dogfights, where the Zero's superior maneuverability was theoretically most pronounced. However, disciplined Hellcat pilots simply refused to engage on such disadvantageous terms. Furthermore, they sought to achieve numerical superiority, dispatching significantly larger formations against smaller American groups. Yet, the Hellcat's decisive speed advantage meant that American pilots retained the critical option to engage or disengage at will, allowing them to selectively pick off stragglers and isolated enemy aircraft, while assiduously avoiding any unfavorable combat situations. By late 1944, combat reports clearly indicated that Japanese pilots were increasingly resorting to desperate and audacious measures. Some resorted to suicidal ramming attacks when their ammunition supplies were exhausted or when their aircraft were too severely damaged to continue fighting effectively. Others attempted to exploit the cover of clouds and complex terrain to establish ambushes, fervently hoping to close the distance sufficiently for their inherent maneuverability to compensate for the Hellcat's myriad other advantages. However, none of these desperate tactics altered the fundamental, brutal mathematics of the aerial engagements. For every single Hellcat successfully shot down, Japanese formations were consistently losing 10, 15, and sometimes even 20 of their own aircraft. The dedicated engineering team at Yokosuka meticulously compiled these harrowing combat reports alongside their rigorous technical findings, ultimately producing a comprehensive and damning assessment that reached the highest echelons of Japanese naval command in November 1944. The report's conclusion was stark and unforgiving. The F6F Hellcat represents a level of aircraft design and industrial capability that Japan cannot match with available resources. Our pilots are not being defeated by superior tactics or greater skill, but by an aircraft that embodies a fundamentally superior approach to fighter design. No amount of courage or fighting spirit can overcome the material advantages American pilots possess. The report unequivocally recommended the immediate development of heavily armed interceptors incorporating some measure of armor protection, even if it necessitated a significant sacrifice of the maneuverability that had always been the paramount priority of Japanese doctrine. Nevertheless, by November 1944, such recommendations, however prescient, were tragically academic. Japan's aviation industry was already grappling with immense and insurmountable challenges, including relentless Allied bombing campaigns, severe and crippling resource shortages, and the critical loss of experienced manufacturing workers to military service. The captured Hellcat had, without a doubt, illuminated the core problem with undeniable clarity, but merely revealing a problem and possessing the industrial capacity to effectively solve it were, as Japan discovered, entirely different matters. The profound revelations gleaned from the analysis of the captured Hellcat spurred a frantic wave of activity across Japan's beleaguered aviation industry. In late 1944, Kawanishi, Mitsubishi, and Nakajima, the nation's principal naval aircraft manufacturers, all received copies of the damning technical reports accompanied by urgent directives to immediately implement the lessons learned. Engineers across these companies swiftly began drafting specifications for new fighter aircraft that would endeavor to incorporate some of the Hellcat's formidable design philosophy. On paper, these conceptual aircraft appeared remarkably promising. In reality, however, Japan's dire industrial situation rendered the production of most of them utterly impossible. Kawanishi's response was the N1K2J Shurden Kai, insurmountable nightmare. The Shurden Kai demanded approximately 17,000 man-hours for its construction, a staggering figure more than double the time required to build a Zero, and it incorporated complex components that necessitated precision manufacturing standards. Japan's factories, ravaged by relentless bombing and hobbled by resource scarcity, struggled immensely to deliver consistent quality and output. Consequently, only about 400 units of the Shurden Kai were ultimately completed before the cessation of hostilities. Mitsubishi, in parallel, embarked on the ambitious development of the A7M Repo, which was intended to serve as the direct successor to the Zero. Engineers designed this aircraft from its inception with the critical lessons gleaned from the Hellcat analysis firmly in mind: a heavier, more robust structure, comprehensive armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a powerful armament suite. The aircraft specifications called for a formidable 2,000 horsepower engine, which was projected to provide performance competitive with contemporary American fighters, while remarkably striving to retain some of the Zero's legendary maneuverability. While the design appeared highly favorable on paper, the first prototype did not achieve its inaugural flight until October 1944, a full year behind its ambitious schedule. The critical engine intended to power the A7M Repo, the Mitsubishi 9 Malawang Quachas, was unfortunately plagued with persistent and debilitating development problems. Issues such as chronic overheating, recurrent bearing failures, and inconsistent manufacturing quality meant that the power plant never reliably achieved its rated output. Tragically, only 8 A7M aircraft were ultimately constructed before their production ceased entirely, a stark testament to the insurmountable industrial and technological challenges Japan faced in the war's final desperate months. The thorough examination of the captured American Hellcat fighter aircraft illuminated a series of critical deficiencies within the Japanese war machine, ultimately highlighting the insurmountable challenges faced as the conflict neared its conclusion. The cessation of production for key components underscored a catastrophic scarcity of vital materials. For instance, the innovative self-sealing fuel tanks, which had initially impressed Japanese aeronautical engineers, relied heavily on synthetic rubber compounds that Japan simply could not manufacture in sufficient quantities. Prior to the war, even when the acquisition of suitable materials was somehow managed, their transformation into operational aircraft became progressively arduous. The sustained American B-29 bombing raids, which intensified significantly from late 1944, systematically targeted industrial infrastructure. The Musashino Aircraft Engine Plant, a primary production facility for Nakajima, endured repeated and devastating strikes, leading to a precipitous decline in production rates. Furthermore, skilled laborers were increasingly conscripted into military service or perished in the bombing raids, their places taken by inexperienced workers who lacked the expertise to uphold the exacting quality standards demanded by precision aircraft manufacturing. A Zero fighter, which in 1942 might have required approximately 10,000 man-hours to construct, now demanded 15,000 or even more, a stark reflection of dwindling worker efficiency and the increased necessity for rework due to compromised quality control. The captured Hellcat also brought to light another profound issue that no amount of engineering ingenuity could resolve: the glaring disparity in pilot training quality. American aviators deploying to the Pacific by 1944 had typically accumulated over 300 hours of flight instruction before engaging in combat. They had undergone rigorous gunnery practice until achieving consistent accuracy, mastered formation flying to the point of instinct, and trained in sophisticated tactics specifically designed to exploit their aircraft's strengths. In stark contrast, Japanese pilot training had been drastically curtailed to barely 100 hours by 1944, with acute fuel shortages forcing even this reduced schedule to be further diminished. New pilots were arriving at combat units barely possessing the fundamental skills to fly their aircraft, let alone effectively engage in aerial combat. The Japanese engineering teams grappled with the cruel irony of their situation. They had successfully acquired an exemplar of America's premier fighter, meticulously analyzed every facet of its design, and thoroughly understood its inherent advantages. Yet, despite this comprehensive knowledge, they found themselves utterly incapable of bridging the performance gap. The Hellcat was not merely a superior aircraft. It represented the culmination of an industrial system that Japan could not replicate, constructed from materials Japan could not access, and engineered for manufacturing processes Japan was unable to implement. Every valuable lesson gleaned from the captured fighter merely served to underscore yet another insurmountable disadvantage. The profound strategic ramifications of the Hellcat analysis extended far beyond the realm of tactical aviation by early 1945. What the captured fighter unequivocally revealed was not merely a disparity in aircraft performance. It offered a stark insight into the fundamental imbalance between American and Japanese capacities for waging war. The combined fleet staff officers who reviewed the technical reports fully grasped that if America possessed the capability to construct fighters of such sophistication in the vast quantities indicated by combat reports, then Japan had, in essence, already lost the industrial war, irrespective of how many battles still lay ahead. The production figures were truly astonishing. Grumman had commenced deliveries of the initial production Hellcats to the Navy in January 1943. By the close of that year, more than 2,500 units had rolled off the assembly lines. Throughout 1944, production maintained an average of nearly 500 aircraft per month. Ultimately, by the war's conclusion, Grumman would have manufactured over 12,000 Hellcats, a number exceeding the total fighter aircraft production of Japan's entire aviation industry across all types during the final 2 years of the conflict. Furthermore, the Hellcat represented just one American fighter type among a diverse array. The Navy also deployed the F-4U Corsair in substantial numbers, while the Army Air Forces fielded P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-51 Mustangs by the thousands. Japanese intelligence officers compiled estimates of American aircraft production that initially appeared implausible until corroborated by multiple independent sources. By 1944, America was producing in excess of 90,000 aircraft annually, encompassing transport planes, bombers, fighters, trainers, every conceivable requirement for modern aviation warfare. Japan's peak production year was also 1944, with approximately 28,000 aircraft of all types, a figure that was already plummeting due to relentless bombing campaigns and pervasive material shortages. The Americans were constructing aircraft 3 times faster than Japan, and individually, American aircraft surpassed their Japanese counterparts across virtually every performance metric. The Hellcat analysis further elucidated the profound depth of America's technological and industrial integration. Every intricate component within the fighter, the formidable R-2800 engine, the propeller, the hydraulic systems, the sophisticated radios, the weaponry, the precision instruments, originated from specialized manufacturers who supplied them in vast quantities too. Numerous aircraft programs. Pratt & Whitney engines powered dozens of distinct aircraft types, while Hamilton Standard propellers equipped fighters, bombers, and transport planes alike. The vast industrial ecosystem supporting the Hellcat's production was expansive, inherently resilient, and continuously strengthening, even as Japan's own manufacturing base steadily deteriorated. This stark realization compelled a fundamental reevaluation of Japanese strategy. The entire war plan had been predicated upon assumptions that now appeared tragically flawed. Japanese planners had initially believed that swift early victories would afford them the necessary time to consolidate their conquests and establish formidable defensive positions, thereby rendering any American counteroffensive prohibitively costly to sustain. They had presumed that after incurring substantial losses, America would be compelled to negotiate a settlement that permitted Japan to retain control over most of its conquered territories. The Hellcat, and the immense industrial power it symbolized, utterly demolished these foundational assumptions. American losses in the Marianas, in the Philippines, and throughout the relentless island-hopping campaign had failed to impede the offensive in the slightest, precisely because America possessed the capacity to replace losses far more rapidly than Japan could inflict them. For every carrier aircraft Japan managed to destroy, 3 more swiftly appeared to take its place. For every pilot killed, 2 newly trained aviators emerged from the vast American training pipeline. Japan, conversely, was losing both pilots and aircraft it simply could not replace. Each engagement, even those in which Japanese forces inflicted significant American casualties, left Japan proportionally weaker because the rates of attrition were fundamentally unsustainable. The most damning revelation presented by the captured Hellcat was the unequivocal evidence that American combat power was still accelerating. Intelligence reports from early 1945 detailed new American fighters already entering service, improved Corsairs, late-model Hellcats equipped with more powerful engines, and even advanced jet aircraft under development. Each successive generation of American aircraft proved more capable than its predecessor. In stark contrast, Japan's newest fighters, the scarce few that actually reached production, were barely competitive with American designs from as early as 1943. The technological gap was not merely static, it was widening at an alarming rate. Senior Japanese officers began to contemplate options that had been utterly unthinkable just a year prior. Some advocated for an immediate negotiated peace before Japan's situation became entirely hopeless. Others championed the idea of a final decisive battle, a single, massive engagement designed to inflict such catastrophic losses on American forces that negotiations would inevitably become a viable option. These intense debates unfolded against the backdrop of the Hellcat analysis, its reports resting on desks across Tokyo, serving as a tangible reminder that Japan was locked in combat with an adversary whose industrial capacity rendered conventional military victory an impossibility. By March 1945, the strategic calculus had become brutally simple. Japan possessed approximately 5,000 aircraft of all types remaining, the majority of which were obsolete, and many were grounded due to a critical lack of fuel or spare parts. American forces approaching Okinawa, however, could call upon thousands of carrier aircraft, augmented by land-based air power operating from captured island bases. The numerical ratio was not merely unfavorable, it was apocalyptic. The captured Hellcat had provided Japanese planners with a precise understanding of why they were losing. Yet, comprehending the problem offered no solutions. Some problems, once fully grasped, revealed themselves to be utterly unsolvable with the available resources. Japan found itself confronting precisely that situation in the spring of 1945. The captured Hellcat remained in a hangar at Yokosuka throughout the final months of the war, a silent, powerful witness to Japan's impending collapse. By the summer of 1945, the engineers, who had meticulously documented every aspect of the fighter, had been reassigned to more desperate tasks, analyzing wreckage from B-29 raids and striving to develop countermeasures for the devastating firebombing campaign that was systematically reducing Japanese cities to ash. The comprehensive technical reports they had compiled gathered dust, as the brutal strategic realities of the war swiftly overtook any lingering need for technical analysis. Understanding the reasons for one's defeat mattered little when the war had, in fact, already been irretrievably lost. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. I am from your country/region, and I found the video topic profoundly insightful. It offers a chilling perspective on the industrial realities and strategic miscalculations that shaped the outcome of World War II in the Pacific, particularly highlighting how technological and logistical disparities can be far more decisive than battlefield bravery. The detailed analysis of the Hellcat's impact on Japanese strategic thinking is particularly compelling, underscoring the irreversible nature of some military disadvantages. When the conflict had already reached a point of no return, American military personnel made a remarkable discovery. In August 1945, subsequent to Japan's formal capitulation, United States forces entered the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, and there, amidst a multitude of other indigenous and seized Japanese aircraft, they stumbled upon a Hellcat fighter. Each of these aerial machines was meticulously tagged with its corresponding Japanese technical documentation. American intelligence operatives found the situation profoundly unsettling, almost surreal. Before them lay one of their very own formidable fighters, which had been painstakingly dismantled, subjected to rigorous enemy analysis, with every individual component photographed and precisely measured. The Japanese technical schematics accompanying the aircraft were astonishingly comprehensive, demonstrating an acute comprehension of the Hellcat's intricate design that remarkably rivaled the original engineering documentation produced by Grumman itself. It was akin to gazing into a looking glass that not only reflected one's own image, but also projected a profound, alien interpretation of that very reflection. The enduring impact of that particular captured fighter transcends its immediate operational significance during the tumultuous years of the Second World War. It stands as a compelling case study, vividly illustrating how the fates of nations in conflict are ultimately determined at the critical junctures where design philosophy, the sheer magnitude of industrial capacity, and overarching strategic vision converge. The Hellcat achieved its unparalleled success not because it boasted the most elegant aerodynamic profile, nor because it exhibited the most exceptional maneuverability, nor even because it was the swiftest aircraft. Exhaustive analysis of adversary equipment constitutes a standard, indeed indispensable, intelligence-gathering protocol, and in this regard, Japan's engineers executed their duties flawlessly. They exhibited exemplary thoroughness, unwavering professionalism, and unvarnished honesty in their comprehensive assessments. Yet, intelligence, no matter how meticulously gathered or incisively analyzed, holds practical value only if one possesses the capacity to act upon its revelations. By the year 1944, Japan had irrevocably lost the ability to respond effectively to the stark truths unveiled: the pervasive material shortages, crippling industrial bottlenecks, and severe resource constraints that rendered Japan incapable of matching American fighter production were not issues amenable to resolution through mere engineering ingenuity. These were intrinsic and fundamental limitations embedded within Japan's industrial economy, and no quantity of captured enemy equipment, however meticulously studied, could possibly alter the grim reality. The Hellcat's astonishing kill ratio of 19-1 stands as one of the most disproportionate combat records ever documented in the annals of aviation history. Nevertheless, that impressive numerical ratio alone fails to encapsulate the entire, complex narrative. A significant proportion of the Japanese aircraft that the Hellcat systematically annihilated were piloted by inadequately trained airmen, flying in technologically obsolete fighters, embarking on missions that were, from their very inception, tragically suicidal. By the latter half of 1944, Japanese aviation found itself in such dire and desperate straits that even a fleet of perfectly designed fighters, flown by an elite cadre of expert pilots, might not have